The alien commander's first words as he stepped into the human academy were, "Why are there so many skulls in your combat hall?" General Vance chuckled at the question, his broad shoulders rising as he gestured towards the macabre display. "Trophies, of course. Each one tells a story." The commander, a towering figure from the Tashai species with bluish-grey skin and an array of bioluminescent patterns that flickered uneasily, narrowed his eyes at the rows upon rows of human skulls lining the walls. "Trophies? You're saying those are from your own species?" Vance shrugged casually. "Not all of them. Some are alien." He paused, then added with a wry grin, "We're equal opportunity trophy collectors." The commander's bioluminescent stripes dimmed, a clear sign of deep discomfort. He made a note in his translator device. "A species obsessed with death," he muttered under his breath. "Not death, victory," Vance corrected, leading the alien visitor further into the academy. "We like to remember our triumphs. Keeps the cadets motivated." The next room was even worse. Rows of young men, some barely past their teenage years, stood in disciplined formation, sparring with a ferocity that bordered on madness. Each wore a sleek combat suit that adapted to their movements, amplifying their speed and strength. The sound of fists slamming into reinforced training dummies filled the air, punctuated by barked commands from a burly instructor. The Tashai commander tilted his head, observing the peculiar scene. One cadet, smaller than the rest, was repeatedly knocked to the ground by a much larger sparring partner, yet he kept getting up, his face smeared with blood from a cut above his eyebrow. "Your trainees show resilience," the commander remarked, his tone carefully neutral. "Resilience?" Vance snorted. "That's Alan. Kid's been knocked out cold 3 times this week alone. Doctor says he should take it easy, but Alan keeps coming back. Says he'll take his partner down or die trying." The alien stripes flickered in alarm. "And you allow this?" "It's encouraged. Builds character," Vance replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The commander turned his gaze back to Alan, who was now charging at his partner with wild abandon. The larger cadet sidestepped neatly, sending Alan crashing into a wall. He collapsed in a heap, groaned, and slowly pushed himself up again. His sparring partner clapped him on the back and said something that made both boys laugh. The commander looked at Vance. "Your species finds amusement in failure?" Vance smirked. "Failure? Alan's not failing. He's learning." The alien commander's translator struggled to process the nuance of that statement, but before he could press further, Vance was already moving. The next stop was the armory. Here, rows of weapons glinted under harsh fluorescent lights. Some were sleek and advanced, with plasma edges and magnetic accelerators, while others were crude yet brutally effective. A blend of technologies that spoke volumes about humanity's willingness to experiment. One cadet was being tested on a new piece of equipment, a shoulder-mounted weapon that looked more like a cannon. He aimed it at a distant target and fired, the recoil slamming him backward into a wall. The target was obliterated along with the steel frame it was mounted on. The cadet picked himself up, rubbing his shoulder. "Needs a little fine-tuning," he said casually, as if being hurled into a wall was a minor inconvenience. "Needs a stronger user, maybe," Vance called out, earning a round of laughter from the other cadets. The Tashai commander's glowing patterns flickered erratically. "Your people seem unconcerned with personal injury." "We're problem solvers," Vance replied. "If something knocks us down, we figure out how to get back up. If it doesn't kill us, we figure out how to make it work for us." "That is an unsettling philosophy," the alien admitted. They moved on to the simulation room, where a group of cadets was engaged in a war game. The holographic display projected a battlefield complete with enemy forces and terrain obstacles. The cadets moved with precision, coordinating their attacks and flanking maneuvers with military efficiency. One cadet broke from the group, charging headlong into the simulated enemy lines. The others shouted at him to hold his position, but he ignored them, throwing himself into a reckless assault. He took out several enemies before being overwhelmed, his avatar blinking out of existence. "Reckless," the commander commented. "Effective," Vance countered. His charge broke their formation, gave the others an opening to finish the job. The alien made another note. "Your species seems to value individuality, even at the cost of the group." "Depends on the situation," Vance said. "Sometimes you need a maverick to break the rules and get the job done. Other times you need discipline. We're good at both." The commander did not respond immediately. Instead, he watched as the cadets completed the simulation. Their holographic enemies reduced to smoldering wreckage. The victorious team exchanged handshakes, their faces lit with a mix of pride and exhaustion. As they left the simulation room, the Tashi commander turned to Vance. "I was told this academy represents the finest of human military training. Is this typical of your species?" "More or less," Vance said with a grin. "We're adaptable. That's why we've survived as long as we have." The alien's translator registered the word adaptable, but flagged it for secondary analysis. There was a note of something else in Vance's voice. Pride, perhaps, but tinged with something darker. They passed by a memorial wall where the names of fallen soldiers were inscribed. Fresh flowers and medals adorned the base of the wall, left by cadets paying their respects. "Your people honor the dead," the commander observed. "We honor their sacrifice," Vance corrected. "Every name on that wall is someone who gave everything so the rest of us could keep going. That's what we teach here: sacrifice, resilience, and the will to win." The alien stopped in front of the wall, his glowing patterns dim. "You say that so easily, as if such sacrifice is normal." "It is," Vance said simply. The Tashi commander made no reply, but his bioluminescence faded even further as they continued their tour. He had come here to better understand humanity's place in the Galactic Alliance. But what he was learning about these strange creatures was beginning to disturb him. And this was only the first day. They reached the cafeteria next. The Tashi commander braced himself. Based on what he had already seen, he suspected the humans might be consuming something as barbaric as their combat methods. Perhaps even those skulls he had seen earlier had been part of some grotesque culinary ritual. Instead, the room was buzzing with energy as cadets wolfed down plates piled high with food. The sheer variety was overwhelming. Steaming bowls of soup, stacks of meat, heaps of rice and bread. Loud conversations filled the space as young men bantered, their energy unchecked even during mealtime. "What do you feed your warriors?" the commander asked, noting the cadets devouring their meals with near-feral intensity. "Everything," Vance said, grabbing a tray for himself. "Carbs, protein, fat, you name it. They need fuel. You burn as many calories as these boys do in a day. You learn to eat like it's a sport." The commander frowned. "Does such excess not lead to inefficiency?" "Not in humans," Vance replied as they moved toward the seating area. "We're built for endurance. Takes a lot of fuel to keep the machine running." As they sat down, a cadet across the table caught the alien commander's eye. His face was marked by a recent scar that ran from his jawline to his ear, but he was grinning as he shoveled food into his mouth. The commander turned to Vance. "That one? Is he injured?" "Brad? Yeah. Took a glancing hit during a live exercise last week. He'll be fine. And yet, he is here eating as if nothing happened." "Why wouldn't he be?" Vance said, amused. "You get hurt, you heal, you move on. That's the job." The alien's bioluminescence flared briefly before dimming again. He had seen scars before among veterans who bore them like burdens. Here they seemed almost like badges of honor. He watched as Brad laughed with the other cadets, the scar evidently forgotten or dismissed as trivial. It was unsettling. Before he could process the scene fully, a loud clanging noise drew his attention. A cadet stood atop a table, raising a glass. To Alan, the madman, the guy who made history today. The room erupted into cheers. Alan, the same battered cadet from the sparring session, stood sheepishly at the center of attention, his swollen face lit up with a grin as his peers chanted his name. "What history did this one make?" the commander asked, bewildered. "Got knocked down 50 times and still won his match," Vance said with a shrug. "You've got to respect that kind of spirit." The commander leaned closer. "Why does your species celebrate such reckless behavior? Would it not be more logical to avoid unnecessary risk?" "Depends on how you define unnecessary," Vance said. Alan's lesson today wasn't just for him. It was for all of them. They saw what sheer determination can do. That's worth celebrating. The alien commander's translator flagged the term determination again, struggling to fully capture the nuance behind the human sentiment. It didn't help that Vance seemed almost smug about it, as though the sheer absurdity of human behavior was a point of pride. From the cafeteria, they proceeded to the outdoor training grounds where cadets were engaged in an array of drills. One group was scaling a towering obstacle course, while another was navigating a simulated battlefield littered with smoke grenades and flashing lights. Everywhere the commander looked, there was chaos, and yet it was strangely organized, as though the humans thrived on disorder. Vance stopped to observe a cadet climbing a rope ladder at breakneck speed. He lost his grip halfway up, falling several meters to the ground. Before the commander could react, the cadet was already back on his feet, shouting, "I'm fine," and scrambling back up the ladder as if nothing had happened. "Do your people not have safety measures?" the commander asked, incredulous. "Of course we do," Vance said, "but they're not bubble-wrapped. They know the risks. And if one of them dies during training, then we mourn them, learn from it, and keep going." The commander's bioluminescent pattern shifted into a dull, unreadable hue. He had heard of human casualty rates in war, but had assumed their disregard for life was an exaggeration. Now he wasn't so sure. Vance, oblivious to his guest's growing discomfort, led him to a smaller group of cadets who were working on a team-building exercise. They stood in a circle, their arms linked as they leaned back precariously over a deep trench. It was a trust drill designed to test their ability to rely on one another. One cadet slipped, and the entire group shifted to catch him before he fell. Their laughter echoed across the field as they reset and tried again. "Why do they laugh at failure?" the commander asked. "Because it's part of the process," Vance said. "You can't take yourself too seriously. It's one of our strengths." "Laughing at weakness is a strength?" "Laughing at ourselves is," Vance corrected. "We mess up, we learn, and we move forward. It's how we grow." The Tashai commander made another note. He was beginning to understand that humanity's strength was not in their technology or their strategy, but in something far harder to quantify. It was in their chaos, their unpredictability, their sheer audacity to defy logic and reason. But understanding it didn't make it any less horrifying. They ended the day at the Academy's museum, where artifacts from humanity's long history of warfare were displayed. From primitive clubs to nuclear-era weapons, the collection told a story of relentless conflict and innovation. The centerpiece was a battered flag, its edges frayed and stained with blood. Beneath it was a plaque that read, "From the ruins we rise." The Tashai commander stared at the flag for a long moment. "Do all your wars end in ruin?" "Not all," Vance said, his tone unusually solemn. "But when they do, we rebuild better than before." The alien's glowing patterns flickered faintly. He wasn't sure what was more disturbing, the human's ability to endure destruction, or their willingness to embrace it as a natural part of their existence. "What do you think of our academy so far?" Vance asked, his usual grin returning. The Tashai commander hesitated. For the first time in his career, he was at a loss for words. The Tashai commander's bioluminescent patterns were dim as they reached the final leg of the tour, a lecture hall where seasoned instructors shared the grim realities of war. with fresh cadets. Rows of young men sat at attention as Colonel Davis, a grizzled veteran with a prosthetic arm, strode across the stage. "Lesson 1, Davis barked, his voice resonating in the room. "War doesn't care how strong you are. War is chaos. You'll lose friends, limbs, and sometimes your sanity. But here's the kicker. It's up to you whether the fight was worth it." The cadets nodded, their faces a mix of fear and resolve. The alien commander couldn't understand how they remained seated, absorbing such blunt truths without breaking. Among his own species, recruits shielded from the harshness of war until absolutely necessary often cracked under pressure later. Humans, it seemed, embraced the brutality early. "Lesson 2, Davis continued, pointing to the cadets. "You don't fight for glory. You don't fight because you hate the enemy. You fight for the guy next to you. That's what keeps you alive." The room was silent, the weight of his words sinking in. The commander's translator flagged several phrases for deeper analysis. The concept of fighting for others, facing death for someone you might not even like, was perplexing. Alien soldiers were trained for the collective good, but this was something else entirely. The human instinct to protect seemed deeply personal, almost irrational. Colonel Davis glanced at Vance and the alien commander. "General, would your guest like to say a few words?" Vance grinned. "Why not? Commander, care to share some wisdom?" The Tashi commander froze. Public speaking wasn't his strength, and certainly not in front of a crowd of unpredictable humans. But the cadet's curious eyes bore into him, leaving little choice. He stepped forward awkwardly, his bioluminescent patterns flickering as he addressed the room. "I am Commander Zalak of the Tashi fleet," he began, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics. "My people value precision, discipline, and order. We view war as a necessary evil, executed with efficiency to minimize loss." The cadets listened intently, but Zalak sensed their skepticism. He continued, struggling to reconcile what he had witnessed today with his prepared remarks. "Your approach is unconventional, chaotic even, yet I cannot deny its effectiveness. You embrace failure, endure pain, and somehow find strength in disorder. It is—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Frightening." The cadets exchanged amused glances, and a few stifled chuckles echoed through the room. Zalek's patterns flared brighter, embarrassment creeping into his tone. "I do not mean this as an insult. Your resilience defies reason. Perhaps that is your greatest strength." The room erupted into applause, and Zalek stepped back, relieved to escape the spotlight. Vance clapped him on the shoulder, his grin widening. "See? You're a natural." The tour concluded at the Academy's parade grounds, where a drill was in progress. Hundreds of cadets marched in perfect formation, their boots thundering against the ground in unison. The spectacle was oddly reassuring to Zalak after the chaos he had witnessed earlier, a rare display of human discipline. Vance stood beside him, arms crossed. "What do you think, Commander?" Still horrified, Zack hesitated. "I am unsettled. Your species is unlike any I have encountered. You are reckless, unpredictable, and driven by emotions that defy logic." "And," Vance prompted, sensing there was more. "And yet," Zalek admitted reluctantly, "it is clear that these traits make you formidable, perhaps even unstoppable. You thrive on challenges that would break others. I do not know whether to admire you or fear you." Vance chuckled, his tone both proud and amused. "Why not both?" As the drill ended, a young cadet broke ranks and approached them, saluting sharply. "Permission to speak, sir." "Granted," Vance said. The cadet turned to Zack, his youthful face radiating curiosity. "Sir, what do you think makes your species strong? What's your edge?" Zalek was taken aback by the question. Among the Tashi, such directness would be considered disrespectful, but here it seemed encouraged. After a moment's thought, he replied, "Discipline. Unity. We operate as one, without hesitation. It is why our fleets are among the most efficient in the galaxy." The cadet nodded thoughtfully. "That's impressive, but with respect, sir, I think we've got something else." "Oh," Zack asked, intrigued despite himself. "And what is that?" The cadet's grin widened. "When things get bad, when everything's falling apart, we keep going. Doesn't matter how tough it gets. We'll fight with rocks if we have to." The simplicity of the statement struck Zack harder than he expected. It echoed everything he had seen that day: the bloodied cadet in the sparring hall, the reckless charge in the simulation, the laughter after failure. These humans weren't just survivors. They were something far more dangerous. A species that refused to quit, no matter the odds. Zalek inclined his head, a rare gesture of respect. "I hope I never find myself on the receiving end of that resolve." The cadet saluted again, returning to his formation as Vance turned to Zalek. "Well, Commander, you've seen us at our best and worst. What's the verdict?" Zalek stared at the row of cadets, their faces filled with determination and an unsettling eagerness for the challenges ahead. "I believe," he said carefully, "that your academy represents the essence of humanity: chaos, courage, and a refusal to accept limits. You are both terrifying and fascinating." Vance laughed, the sound echoing across the grounds. "I'll take that as a compliment." As Zalek boarded his ship later that evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had glimpsed something far more dangerous than he had anticipated. The humans were not just warriors. They were survivors who thrived on adversity, finding strength in places most species feared to tread. For the first time in his career, Zalek doubted the superiority of the Tashai. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more: the Academy itself, or the nagging thought that if war ever came between their species, the Tashai might not win.